Well, hello everybody, and welcome to Key Concepts, Conversations for Piano Teachers. My name is Ben Fonville. I'm the piano coordinator here at Amro Music, and today we are joined with George Litterst from Time Warp Technologies. Hi, George.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having me. I realize you're in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm probably 800 miles or so away in southern Massachusetts.
Well, it's good to have you here today. So today we'll be diving into several pieces of software. When I first had a piano teacher ask me about a program called Internet Midi, it sounded familiar, and I had to kind of go back and think and do some research and realized I had come across this program years and years ago, but it didn't look like anything I'd remembered, and then I started hearing more and more people talking about it. And you know, during the COVID pandemic here, we've had so many questions about the challenges of teaching remotely and how to overcome certain obstacles with audio quality and video and things like that. So we've been looking for resources, and I have to be honest, I don't think I've found a better resource for the potential to improve dramatically the online lessons experience, not just to overcome audio challenges, but really to elevate the students' takeaway. I think there are so many features that we're going to dive in and look today. Thinking back to my own days teaching in the classroom, I wish this was a program I had been using to teach school band even then with some of the things. So I'm really excited about this. If you're watching this live, just a couple housekeeping notes. Don't forget, at the bottom of your screen you'll see a Q&A button. Feel free to chime in and post questions that come up. If you want to go back and see something again, or say, hey, what's the implication of that? Feel free to go ahead and use that. We'll try to field questions as we go along or at the end. If you're watching this on the recording, we're so glad that you tuned in, and feel free to reach out to us here at Amro Music. We will have this setup available, and we'll be ready to dive into it and happy to kind of be your guinea pig to help you get set up with anything that you see that you like today. So with that said, one other quick note, and then I'm going to turn it over to George. The setup you're going to see today, George will explain how the program works. I'm sitting at a digital piano, and George is actually sitting at an acoustic piano. And so through the power of this software, we're going to kind of have a little interactive lesson experience. And when I play my piano, you're going to physically see the keys on George's piano moving. That's through the power of the one piece of software called Internet Midi. And when he plays his piano, you're actually going to be hearing my digital piano playing. And so we don't have to worry about all of the things that Zoom does with audio, and I am not going to give away the magic. So with that said, we're so glad you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to George.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to start with a little introduction to myself and the things that we're going to talk about today. So I'll take a second here and get a screen share set up. So at this point you should be seeing an opening slide here, my company logo, Time Warp Technologies. I'm a piano teacher of many decades in southern Massachusetts, and I'm also the president of a software company called Time Warp Technologies. You may have encountered some of our applications and may have gotten to know me through them. Our applications include SuperScore Music on the iPad, Home Concert Extreme, which is an interactive MIDI file player that won the Francis Clark Award for Keyboard Pedagogy in 2010, and more recently Internet Midi, which we're going to start with today, and Classroom Maestro, which is an application that's used in piano classrooms, typically at the college level, but elsewhere as well, and has become frequently used tool through screen sharing in online individual lessons. So we've all faced this horrible pandemic for the last 6 months here, and I've had the opportunity through Facebook groups and through my software company to be in touch with lots and lots of piano teachers in the United States and around the world. And it's been really quite amazing to me to see how many people have been willing, just on a moment's notice, in a sense, to finally take the time to study their available technological resources and get their studio online so they can continue their very important work in music instruction. And it's not been easy for a lot of people, but I think if we look back on the experience of the last 6 months, I think most of us can probably agree that opportunity is the flip side of adversity. And when we face adversity, it brings out something new in us. It focuses our attention on other resources that we might not have looked at so carefully in the past. And many things maybe have changed for the better. We've all had to adopt video conferencing applications, whether they're Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime, for our teaching. In the context of doing so, we've learned that certain ones are better for certain things. If it's high quality audio through a microphone, well, that's a problem with almost anything, but Zoom has had the best features thus far. If it's screen sharing, well, we can rule out FaceTime because it does not allow screen sharing, and so forth. But no doubt you've settled on something that's hopefully working for you. You've probably gotten into the issue of getting an external camera set up. This Logitech C920s Hd Cam has been very popular with people. If you've gotten fancy with being able to position the camera on a microphone boom, you might have gotten something like this little doodad that enables you to position a camera easily. And for audio, you might have gone beyond the built-in audio of your computer and have gone to something like this Yeti Blue USB microphone that has all kinds of adjustments that are possible and will provide greater clarity. Today, though, we're not going to get into the weeds of these components, but rather take the whole experience to the next level beyond. And I'd like to start by giving you a picture of my setup. I happen to have an acoustic piano with a Midi system in it, and I put my computer onto the piano. I've repurposed cast off a large television off to the side so I can see my students in large size over there. And as you can see, with this boom microphone on top of the webcam, I have positioned my camera such that when I'm looking at that large screen, I'm looking right at my student and literally having eye contact. And you can see to the right of that my Yeti microphone on a boom, where I've tried to place it in a reasonable way for picking up sound. And here's another view of my studio. But the more important thing is that I use software called Internet Midi that actually connects my piano to my student's piano. Now, when I say to my student's piano, the piano has to have a Midi feature built into it. And so there are some acoustic pianos that have Midi capabilities built in. I know at Ben Fonville's store, they have a range of these kinds of instruments, and at the very high end, there's Steinway pianos today that are built with a system called Spirio. And where we find it most students, however, is they have a digital piano, and there's a range of those kinds of instruments that are available. And Ben today is seated in front of a digital piano. So the whole idea is when we've got our pianos connected, when Ben plays a note on his piano, that message is going to be sent into mine, and he's literally going to be playing my piano from about 800 miles away, as though he were seated on this bench in my studio. And it starts to make it feel a little bit more like an in-person lesson. And when I play my piano, I'm going to be playing his as well. His keys are not going to move physically because it's not an acoustic piano with a player system, but the tones will be generated inside the instrument as though I were on the bench where he is playing there. And we have other resources available to us during this connection, such as an on-screen keyboard that displays what we're doing. There's an optional module that we'll show you called Classroom Maestro that enables us to illustrate chords and scales and various kinds of things. So I'll stop the screen sharing here. To get started, I won't yet show you my Internet Midi screen, but I'll just tell you that I'm connected right now to Ben's piano, and I'm going to ask him to play a little bit. And what's going to happen is that you will hear my piano through my Zoom microphone. So the quality of the sound that you're hearing is going to be limited by the microphone and by Zoom. But here in my room, I'll be hearing excellent audio because I have a 7-foot piano that's been nicely tuned, and Ben is going to play a little bit, and you'll be able to see in Zoom my keys moving as he plays. Would you, Ben?
Sure.
Okay, great. And I'm delighted to see that you've learned it in the key of C sharp minor. I have to say that because, just as a quick aside, I've got a very close professional friend who back in his college days auditioned to get into a music program at a university, and he was largely a self-trained pianist from home without rigorous classical training, and he had learned the Moonlight Sonata from a recording, and the recording was playing on his turntable at the wrong speed, and he learned it at the wrong key. Apparently played it very well. The faculty of the institution at first couldn't understand what was taking place. But anyway, your performance came over really well over here. So I think at this point it'd be nice to show everybody what the behind-the-scenes experience is and what the setup actually looks like. So I'm going to share my screen again here, and this time I'm going to be sharing my Internet Midi window. So here with Internet Midi, we've got 5 buttons at the top. The first button is the Midi button, where we do Midi setup with our local keyboard. The second button is our Internet connection button, and you can see on the right side of my screen I have a list of buddies to whom I've connected my piano in the past. And when we connected with Ben today, all I did was select his name from the list, and that button just above that currently says Stop Connection previously said Start Connection. I clicked on it, and we were connected together. There's a diagnostic screen that we'll skip over for now, and this is the Perform view. And what I generally do with my lessons is the following, and depending upon whom I'm teaching, I actually use different programs. With one student I'm using FaceTime, and another happens to be Skype for different reasons, and another one is Zoom. And what I do is, in these applications, I set the video conferencing window to be, quote, always on top, or in some programs the term is float. And so the video conferencing window can float. I position it above the keyboard there, and if it's floating, that means if I click on any of the Internet Midi buttons, Internet Midi is not going to suddenly cover up the video window. The video window will stay visible on top. And so at that point, I've got an on-screen keyboard, and it's got pedals. I can move my pedals up and down here, and you see them animating. You'll see the keys animate when I play, and there are also velocity meters. So for example, if I'm talking to a student about projecting the melody over the accompaniment, not only will the student hear me do that on the student's piano, they'll be able to see it on the screen. So I'm just holding that down with my fingers at this moment, but, oh, I'm sorry. Ben, did that audio come through?
Yes, it did.
Okay, I stepped on my other mic, my mic button here in a moment. I thought maybe I had canceled it. Okay, so what we have already is something that's actually quite profound if you think about it. at first glance, we've got this improvement to the lesson scenario in the sense that because the student and I are playing each other's piano, we're actually hearing good audio, it's clear, we can tell what's going on. But beyond that, the more profound part is that we have a multimodal environment for our communication. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what I mean by this. If you've been teaching piano for any length of time, particularly in a one-to-one situation, you've actually been in the best possible teaching circumstance that a teacher can have, because you've been able to address each student with whom you work on an individual basis, knowing what their learning strengths are, what their interests are, what their weaknesses are, and so forth. And you probably realize that you might have two students who are playing the same piece, but based on who they are and what their background is, if you use certain terminology with one of the students, the eyes will glaze over and you'll lose them immediately. But with another student, they may just be right into what you're saying there. And on the fly, you learn how to make adjustments on a per student basis. Well, learning takes place through multiple avenues into our brain, literally. We learn through our eyes, we learn through our ears, we learn through our fingers kinesthetically as we play. We learn conceptually as we start to make connections between things, like learning that a major chord has a major third at the bottom and a minor third at the top, and all of a sudden the light goes on and we start to understand what that major chord is all about, and so forth. So in this new world of online teaching, our first approach for most of us has probably been one of, well, what can I do to make this new environment just like what it was like during in-person lessons? And of course it's different. But when we flip things around and ask ourselves the question, through this new medium of interactivity through the internet, what do we have that we didn't have before, and how can we take advantage of it? So in my own situation, for example, I'm in a one piano studio, and when I'm teaching students in person, they play. If I want to demonstrate, I got to get them off the bench, and it's a little crowded here, they got to walk out of the way, and I play, and then we've got to do this little dance, and they can come back on the bench, and so forth. When I'm teaching online, I immediately have a two-piano environment, and it's actually, for me, much more efficient than what it had been previously. But now I've got this ability to communicate with my students through all of these modalities. They're going to hear my voice, they're going to hear me playing their piano, and they're going to see what's happening, and in some ways see what's happening even more clearly than in person. Because think about it. In person, when the student sees me play, I might be talking about how I'm playing staccato or how I'm playing legato. And yes, they can see my hand and they can come close and watch my hand, but what is my hand doing? It's actually covering up the notes that I'm manipulating, and they're not really getting a total view of what I'm doing. And if I'm asking them to learn how to pedal properly, and I sit down and demonstrate that, well, they're going to be looking at the keyboard and looking down at my foot and back at the keyboard and over to the music and so forth, and they can't really take it all in at once. But let's talk about pedaling just as an example of using the medium that we have here. I can now tell a student that what they need to do if they're going to pedal in a legato way is to play their first chord, then put the pedal down, then lift their fingers, get them ready for the next chord, and as their fingers go down, the pedal goes up, then the pedal goes down. You can lift your hand again to get ready for the next chord, and simultaneously, fingers down, pedal up. And so forth. and it's all right there, and you can talk them through it. And when they do it, they can even, as they're playing, they can even watch the screen, for that matter, and get some insight into what they're doing. So already now I'm addressing my students through multiple modalities. Now, what other things can we do? Well, one of the challenges that we have with our students is giving them perspective on their own playing. It's very difficult to play and really hear yourself objectively. And I think that's really the case because playing an instrument is a multitasking experience if you really break it down. You've got to be thinking about what you're doing at the moment. You got to be thinking into the future to what you're about to do. And you got to be thinking into the past, remembering what you just did and evaluating that so that you can use that information to help guide your fingers right now and what they're about to do in the future. And so your mind goes back and forth between these three different temporal locations. And typically students get stuck in one place in time and they can't take it in. But now we can do something like this. In this Perform view in Internet Midi, I've got record and playback controls. And if my student plays a 2-minute Clementi sonatina movement, let's say, and I need to help them with the rhythm in measure 5, well, after they've done playing that movement for me, they don't know much about what happened in measure 5. I might tell them about it. I might play it for them the way they played it and tried to say, see, this is what you did. Wasn't very good, was it? But it's really hard, actually, to have a coherent conversation about what took place 2 minutes ago. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Ben if he would just play the very same thing again, that little passage of the Moonlight Sonata. And I'm going to press the record button here, and we're going to record him.
Sure. George, you make me a little nervous. Let's try that again.
Well, actually, that's all right, because now we have something that we could try to correct. You are a perfect imitation of a student. Thank you very much for that. Anyway, my whole point is this. We just made a recording, and it says right here it took place on September 17th, 2020. At this time, I'm in Eastern time, so it says it was 11:23 and 16 seconds. I can rewind this to the beginning and play back what he did. And so forth. And if it was a longer piece, whoops, sorry, meant to hit the stop button. If it was a longer piece and I just wanted to go to like the middle section or the first third, I could grab that slider in the middle of the screen and just sort of go to that area and just play that part. And it's going to play on my piano, it's going to play on the student's piano, and now we're hearing the same thing. And it was what the student had played, and we can have a coherent conversation about that. If there was something about the articulation that was, mushy because the student was literally overlapping the fingers when the student shouldn't have, or something like that, I might take this slider over here next to the stopwatch and grab it and change the tempo, slow it down, and then we can basically put the performance under a microscope if we wanted to. So now we've got an ability not only to have an objective conversation, but we can even start to manipulate the performance a little bit. We could try it out at a slower or a faster tempo. There's a volume slider. We could try it out a little louder, a little softer, or even edit in a crescendo on the fly to do sort of a what-if kind of a scenario. And once we're done, if this was a piece that we wanted to save for reference purposes, or if it was an accompaniment that I recorded for my student to practice with during the week, they could click on the button over here, the floppy disk button. We used to save recordings on floppy disks and save it somewhere. So either person during the lesson can do the recording and can save whatever is recorded. If multiple pieces have been recorded during the session, they get named, and you can choose which one it is you want to listen to and save. And if you want to load a pre-existing recording, such as maybe a MIDI file that comes with the Hal Leonard Student Library, or with the Alfred Premier piano method, or with the Faber piano method, you can load that file in, or the student can load that file in, and actually play along with it during the lesson. And you have some tempo control to go along with that. So these are some of the things that we can do right now that I find are just very effective ways of communicating now through this new medium. And I'd like to now go into a more conceptual type of learning. And so Ben, you and I are going to click this button up here called Classroom Maestro. Now,
All right.
Classroom Maestro is a standalone program. And so a lot of teachers who haven't yet been doing the MIDI to MIDI connection have gotten Classroom Maestro and have found it to be a very effective tool through screen sharing to show information to the student, because we have an interactive musical staff display right here. So at the moment I'm in what we call single note mode. I could play a note like this, and I could ask Ben, what is the name of this note? And he could tell me, and then I could reveal what the answer is, and we could see if he was right or wrong. I might ask him, look at that black key on the keyboard on the screen. Could you think of another name? Could we write that in another place on the staff? And he might tell me, yeah, you could do that as a G sharp. And we can make an immediate change right here and show that. So we can do note quizzes. We can do it with or without a key signature, for example. I mean, there's a B flat, but if we were hiding the key signature, it would need to look like that on the staff with an accidental. The program is musically intelligent. It understands what major or minor key you're in at any one time. What I'm going to do is I am going to play an E, and I'm going to ask Ben, my student du jour, if he would play a perfect fifth above that note. And I apologize, I was in single note mode. I needed to go to interval mode. And there we are. So now you're seeing the note that I played. It's green on the keyboard, on my keyboard anyway. His is coming in as red. We have different color choices that we can make independently of each other to show who's playing what notes. And you can see that both of these notes have also appeared on the staff. So now, as we're starting to get into more conceptual areas of music, think about the learning that's taking place. Well, we heard the sound of that perfect fifth. We saw visually how it lays out on two white keys on the computer keyboard. We see how it's 5 lines and spaces apart, the notes on the staff. And something else, we actually are experiencing it through our fingers, tactily, as we play our instrument. So it's not just a question now of you talking at the student, but the student is now participating in the discovery of what is taking place. Let's do another example. I'm going to switch us over to chord mode, and I'm going to play a C major chord. I'm going to ask Ben if he'd turn that into a C7 by just playing one note. Very good. So now we have a C7. He's added the B flat to my triad. Now, we're seeing it in jazz analysis. We can easily switch to Roman numeral analysis. And our key signature, which is set to a major key, is apparently the key of F. This is the dominant 7th. If we were to go to the key of B flat, it would be a secondary dominant, 5 of 5. In key of E flat, it's a different secondary dominant. And if we were to switch from major to minor, again, the analysis is going to change. So the program is musically intelligent, understanding major and minor keys, how to spell notes. and it's, in this context, two-way interactive. So what else can we do with this? Well, we got 3 flats here. I'm going to go back to major, and I'm going to switch us to scale mode. And I'm going to ask Ben if he would play an E-flat major scale, except when you get to the top, instead of playing a D natural, play a D flat. That's right. So you've played an E-flat Mixolydian scale. We could, of course, hide the analysis or bring it up as we wish. Now, normally the program is going to show scales low to high. We do have an alternate modality in which we can show melodic shapes. Oops. So that they would be in the order in which we played the notes. We can hide the on-screen keyboard display, and so if you wanted to put a few notes up really quickly and ask the student to sight read those notes, that would be a possible thing that you could do. Now, if I were to show the student how to go about playing Ode to Joy, let's say in the key of F, well, for starters, I don't think I would want to have notes flying around on the staff. So I would disable the staff display. And I would want, at this point, maybe to show my student, where are you going to put your hands on the keyboard for this piece? What's the hand position? So we have something called hand position mode. And we had a little stuck note there. Let's do that again. I think Ben had brushed on a key there, so there was a red one there. But in any case, that would be the 5-finger pattern for F major in the right hand and in the left hand. So I've got a way of illustrating that. So hopefully you've gotten this idea in this little set of examples that I've rushed through very quickly, that in a very fast and facile way I've been able to change between these modalities without physically keeping my fingers on the screen. I can freeze the display and so forth. And that's all done through keyboard shortcuts. Right now I have the caps lock key on my computer keyboard engaged, and if I disengage it, you'll see all these things go away. And if I engage it again and play 3 notes, well, this is in hand position mode. It's showing them in one modality, but if I switch to chord mode, which would be letter C for chord, I'm now going to see my chords this way. If I want to turn off the analysis, that would be letter A on the computer keyboard, I can hide the analysis. And so all of these different functions in Classroom Maestro are mnemonic functions. They're very easy to learn, and the application comes with a handy chart to show you these things. But I can show you just very briefly here in the dialog box. There are a lot of things you can do with this program, and over on the left side under program mode where you see N, H, S, I, C, and so forth, those are the keyboard shortcuts for engaging these various functions. So to use Classroom Maestro, just as a recap, you can acquire it and use it all by itself through screen sharing, in which case it's a presentation tool one way from you to the student, showing things to the student. If you get Internet Midi, Classroom Maestro functions inside of Internet Midi. To connect to your student's keyboard, the student needs Internet Midi, and if they're going to have the same display as you with Classroom Maestro, they would need that also. And so then you've got this complete environment, and you can do all of these things together. So those are the basics here of the way in which I use this online medium for working interactively with students. Now, I did want to show you another important thing, which is, well, what do you leave the students with during the week to practice with? Something that's interactive and helpful. And in a moment, I'm going to talk about SuperScore and show that to you. But before I do, I'm starting to wonder, Ben, if there might be some questions from our audience here that I should address before delving into another topic.
Yeah, thank you, George. I'm looking here. Let me pull up the Q&A on my side. I'm not seeing any questions right now, but if you all have any, please definitely put them in the Q&A box or the chat. Kind of monitoring both. So, George, I'll probably just interrupt you there if something pops through.
Okay, because I'd be happy to answer questions as we go along, certainly. All right, well, what I would like to do at this moment is to share my iPad screen. And one of the things that Zoom enables you to do rather conveniently is to share whatever's on your iPad. And if you're on Windows, it's a wireless sharing through your network. If you're on Mac, it could be wireless or wired, wired always being the preferred thing. So I'm going to choose share screen. I'm turning on the share computer sound, which means that we'll be sharing my iPad sound as well. And now you've got, should have Scott Joplin's Bethina on the screen. Pause the music right there. So you're looking at an example of an electronic score in this application, which is a free download called SuperScore on the iPad. Music in SuperScore is purchased inside the app, but the app itself is free and it comes with a lot of free scores to get you started. So how does this differentiate itself at first glance from other applications that show scores? Many of you are used to PDF viewers such as FourScore or PiaScore and others, which are rather remarkable programs that will even let you use your camera to take a picture of a page of music, and you can annotate it, and you can use a Bluetooth foot pedal to turn the pages and whatnot. Those things are wonderful. And we have much of that same functionality actually built into SuperScore. You can use it with PDFs. But a PDF is only a picture of a piece of paper. It has no musical intelligence and it has no built-in performance. Now, in this example here of the Scott Joplin Waltz that I played, hopefully you noticed right away at the beginning there was a retard. There was some gentle undulation to the ongoing tempo, and that's because the performance was actually recorded by a pianist. And it's a pianist, a wonderful one from New York named Richard Dowling, who concertized all over the United States during the Joplin centennial year, playing all of Scott Joplin's works. And we're bringing them all out in SuperScore with Richard Dowling's performances. So the performance is Midi. It'll play back as you just now heard it using the built-in Midi tone generator in SuperScore, or if you've connected it by Midi to your keyboard, it will play back through your instrument as though the performer who is embedded in the score is literally playing your piano for you. And you do have things like tempo control, as you can now see in the bottom right area, and you can adjust the tempo. After the performer has recorded the performance that we put into the score, we typically offer an opportunity to switch off the playback of one hand or the other, so that you could play one hand while the master plays the other and do it at slow tempo if you wish. And we offer some interactive playback modes if you have a digital instrument or any kind of MIDI capable instrument. There is a learning mode in which the scorer will pause on any note and wait for you to play it correctly. There's a jam mode in which it'll wait for your first note and then you have to keep up. And there's a perform mode in which it will actually track your tempo as you speed up and slow down. Now the score itself is liquid, which is to say, if you take two fingers and put them down on the screen and pinch to make the score smaller, it'll get smaller. And if you put down two fingers and spread, it'll get larger. And what's remarkable about it is that the music is literally re-engraved on the fly to fit your viewing size and the orientation of your iPad. To my knowledge, we're the only application on the planet at this moment that has a liquid music display technology that actually adheres to publication quality standards. So that's a little bit about an overview here. I'd like to show you some of the things that we're doing with classical works. I've been a great admirer over the years with urtext editions, for example, and we all teach the Clementi sonatinas. Maybe you've at some point bumped into the fact that Clementi wrote two different books of waltzes. The waltz was becoming a very popular dance in Clementi's day, and this particular one that I'm going to show you is a lot of fun because it was written with optional parts for tambourine and triangle, because as the piano was emerging as an important instrument in the late 1790s and early 1800s in England, and more people were able to afford to buy instruments and have teachers and buy music and so forth, tambourine and triangle became very popular as well. And so in this edition, we get into the scholarship behind this, and here we can see all of the parts. There's triangle part and tambourine part. We can show and hide parts at will. We don't have to see them all if we don't want to take up all that screen real estate with it. But I'll just give you just a little taste of this fun waltz that he did, which has a wonderful glissando for the pianist. And so forth.
George, that's great. I played a bunch of Clementi pieces and I had no idea that he wrote for percussion with piano.
Oh yeah, up until about 1820, the tambourine was very popular in Europe, and there were tambourine masters who'd give lessons on the different techniques for going around with your finger and shaking it and so forth. It was quite amazing, and this one is going to be published in the next month or two with a lot of scholarship behind it that's illustrated in the PDF. We all teach these early sonatinas that are alleged to be by Beethoven, but nobody knows for sure were they by Beethoven. They were published after he was dead, and some people seem to think that, well, it was after he died and the publisher who published them wasn't connected to Beethoven. How do we know that it was really him? And the fact of the matter is that they were published 20 years before he died, and Beethoven never complained about them being attributed to him. So in our commentary, we go into the history of this, and here are the scores, the sonatina in F, the one in G, very famous. But we go even further. If you wanted to know what was it like to play this piece if you had bought it in 1807 when it was published in Altona, Germany, well, this is what the score looks like. And we found that there's 2 copies of it available somewhere in the world. I got one out of a library in Germany. We cleaned it up in Photoshop, brought it up to like brand new visual quality. But you can see the funny way that repeats were done. You can see the fact that there's no fingering, very little dynamic or expressive guidance and so forth. I mean, that's just the way things were done back in those days. Now, here's a wonderful piece that I'd love to show you by Clara Schumann. It's called an impromptu in E major. And in this, we give quite a history of Clara and the family that she raised and her relationship with her father and her husband and so forth. But here's the remarkable thing. I'd just like to read you a little bit from the introduction. The year is 1839. A 20-year-old piano virtuoso is electrifying audiences all over Europe. Like other virtuosi of the day, this pianist always includes some of her own compositions on the program, and audiences love them. That same year, against her father's wishes, but with a court ruling in her favor, this young lady marries a composer named Robert Schumann, 9 years her senior. He's a composer whose works are difficult for contemporary audiences to understand and who is little known beyond the readership of the music journal that he publishes. This same year, the young pianist, whose maiden name was Clara Wieck, expresses doubt about herself as a composer. She writes in her diary, "I once believed that I had creative talent, but I have given up this idea. A woman must not wish to compose. There was never one to do it. Am I intended to be one? It would be arrogant to believe that. That was something with which only my father tempted me in my former days. But I soon gave up believing this. May Robert always create. That must always make me happy." And thus began the married life of two of the most important figures of the Romantic era. So, despite those doubts, Clara did go on and compose. She composed quite a bit of music during her marriage to her husband, and she concertized to bring in money for the family, and she bore 8 children. It was just an amazing thing. After her husband died, she largely put composition aside. She curated his music. She gave concerts to support children and grandchildren. But in the 1880s, a French publisher was putting together an album of piano solos from everybody who was famous in Europe, 57 composers, 6 of whom were women. And they asked Clara to come up with something, and she did. And this is an impromptu that's published and then basically disappeared after that, and it's an absolute gem. So hopefully you're starting to get the idea here that Superscore in many ways is turning the whole idea of music publishing on its head. Up till now with paper music, to confront a score means you've got to bring a lot of pre-existing musical knowledge to that piece of paper. And you're looking at all this black ink on a white background, and your brain is saying, oh, this must be an 8th note, and then you're having to figure out where it is on the piano and interpret it and so forth. What we're doing here is we're publishing music that's now living, breathing, it's organic. It's music that you just press the play button and it reaches out to you and says, here I am, this is what I sound like, would you like to engage with me? And I'm finding that students who are not terribly facile yet with their ability to read scores usually like to make the music nice and big so they can more easily determine the distance between lines and spaces and so forth. And those that are better readers, they aggregate all this information more easily, and they can understand chordal relationships vertically and horizontally. And they even on small iPads, I found my advanced students usually look at their music at a fairly small size. And of course, with an embedded performance, you got a model to introduce the work from the get-go, and so you've got a lot of material with which to work. Now, there's a lot of music from small and large publishers that are available in Superscore. I'll give you just a very brief view of the publishers that we have. I'm trying to tap the right button here. There we go. We've got music from Alfred and Boozy and Hawkes and Carl Fisher and Bradley Sowash. CN Connections is Christopher Norton's company, Hal Leonard, and many other places here. So in the case of Christopher Norton, you may be familiar with the Norton Connections that was formerly published by FJH. It's now published separately by Chris. It was 8 levels, and now it is 10 levels. And here's an example. They have backing tracks. From the Numeral level 9. And we've innovated in yet another way with a publication like this. You'll notice in the upper right corner next to the Parts button, there's a video button that we can tap on, and we can actually hear Chris playing this as a you find out, when it's dotted quarters and sixteenths, but it's a swing rhythm. How does Chris play it? How does he handle the grace notes and so forth? I mean, imagine that you could do that with a Beethoven sonata and actually hear Beethoven's performance. Well, you can't. But here, in Chris's case, you'll get a video acoustic recording of his performance, and you'll also get Chris embedded in the score itself, playing your piano.
So, George, let me also ask, there's some markup potential here. I don't want to jump ahead on the scores
yes.
also, right? I mean, just as a teaching tool for some of this educational music.
Absolutely. So let's just take an example here. I was going to show a little concertino by a composer named Ernst Mali. If I tap in the upper right area the annotation button, I get into markup mode. And if I tap the pencil on the left side, I could say I want to circle that, for example. And after I do, I can change the color, the size of my markup. I can move it around. And I can say, well, really, I meant to put that down here. And so forth. And so that markup is now in the score. If I needed to put some other kind of musical symbol or even a pre-done fingering or something else into the score, I've got all of these symbols at my fingertips that I can do it. I might use the eyeglasses here to remind myself to watch out when I get to that spot. So now I have these things in my score. If the measures move around because I've changed the size or the orientation of my iPad, the markups move with it. And in the upper right area, we have a button for showing and hiding markups.
That is very impressive. I think that's the first, at least for me, my biggest complaint with digital sheet music has always been, well, you can't, write in fingering notations and things like that in a way, that's really helpful. But because all of your markups reflow, to me, it's like we've crossed that bridge of what would be needed to kind of make this viable for a student.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I should also mention that we do work with foot pedals, either MIDI triggers or Bluetooth foot pedals. So if you're just using this as a score without any kind of interactive playback, you can turn the page with a foot pedal. It can either be the full page turn or the partial page turn, in which you step on the pedal once and the wiper comes down just below or just above the final system on the page. You can move your eyes whenever you feel like it to the next page, step on the pedal again, and it comes down further. This is a wonderful little concertino called The Cuckoo and the Donkey. By a Brazilian composer based on a folk tune, and it's arranged here with an orchestral reduction for the teacher to play. But when we publish it, we also publish it with the full orchestration. This piece only takes a couple minutes to play. It's accessible to a middle school pianist to be able to play with a middle school or even a high school orchestra Wonderful stuff. I'll just show one other thing here, a publication from Cyber Conservatories, a venture of Paul Sheftel and mine, Folk Songs from Planet Earth. It's 9 levels of folk song material from around the world, and at each level we detail what the issues are in terms of meters and note values and keys and hand coordination that are required to do the pieces. And Paul has done really wonderful Midi accompaniments for these. And I found in my teaching the Midi file becomes the replacement for the metronome. And unlike a metronome that's just ticking time, it's musical. It gives you a sense of context and clarifies things. And my students have outstanding rhythm. They just learn it naturally by having had these resources. So anyway, that's a little bit of a tour here of SuperScore. I tell you that in my own teaching, I would say that 90% of the music that I'm assigning to students these days is in SuperScore. We have music from beginning piano methods. The most recent one to come to SuperScore is the Succeeding at the Piano by Helen Marley, published by FJH. And all the way up through late intermediate playing, well represented, and we now have an emerging beautiful collection of music at the advanced level, which will be growing substantially in the coming year. But these are resources that the student can use at home and help the student to really take ownership of the learning process when you're not there as the teacher. I once wrote an article for American Music Teacher, the publication of MTNA, in which I think I titled it, "Give me just 0.023% of your time and I'll teach you how to play the piano." And I did this little calculation based on, maybe 40 or 45 weeks of lessons of a half hour. How much of our students time do we actually have under our own control and guidance? And it's just minuscule. So this idea of being able to help move the burden productively, the ownership of the learning process onto the students' shoulders, and to give them things that enable them to be effective self-teachers during the week is really what it's all about for me. And SuperScore has been my go-to resource.
That's great. Let me ask you a question here. So if we're working, say, in a lesson and we record something in Internet Midi, which we were working on earlier, do we have the ability to import MIDI files into SuperScore? So could we theoretically take what we worked in the lesson and then import it there into SuperScore?
Not currently. SuperScore has largely been constructed around the idea of it's a vehicle for acquiring and interacting with commercial materials.
Okay.
Although there is an optional PDF import feature. But our other application for Mac, PC, and iPad, called Home Concert Extreme, will work with MIDI files. So you can import there. However, I would tell you, though, it is a notation-based MIDI file player, and unless your recording was done to a metronome, it wouldn't know how to put it into rational notation.
Quantize it, right? Okay. Yep. Excellent. Well, this is just very exciting, though. All the tools. I mean, students today learn so differently than students 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, and I think it's always fun to see when teachers adopt new tools, or to not fun, but the flip side of that is just to see folks struggling sometimes with some traditional things that just don't work as well. I think.
Well, I'll just say as an unsolicited comment, Ben, that one of the things I really appreciate about you and your approach in your store is that what we've been talking about today is really a way of aggregating diverse resources. There's the instrument itself and what its capabilities are, and you are selling and training your customers on the use of these fine performance tools, which are wonderful pianos, plus they have the modern technology. And publishers have been publishing the music that we all aspire to play and the music that we teach, and they very often have created these MIDI files that have been a little bit in the background in recent years and not as emphasized, but increasingly they're migrating their materials to a digital platform like SuperScore, and then these applications from Time Warp put a bow around the whole thing, integrate them together, and the story is really, it's the one of the integration of these things.
Well, bravo for creating some fabulous tools. I know that our teacher community is definitely interested in these, and we'll be sharing them, and hope many of them do adopt some of these. If you do have any questions, now would be the time to pop them in the Q&A. George, any other final thoughts, things that we should cover today?
Well, just the following, really. You know, prior to the pandemic, I speak with many teachers, and there were some who were extremely adventurous getting into technology, and then many others who felt like, I'm not sure I have the time to get into this. I'll save that for my next vacation or whatever. And now that everybody's had to get into it, I think everybody's really found out that having been thrown into the deep end, you can swim. And sometimes we found out that, you know, swimming can actually be fun. And there's a lot of opportunity here. You know, as I said early on, opportunity is the flip side of adversity. And if you've been manipulating Zoom or Skype or FaceTime, and you've been manipulating an iPad, and you've been setting up cameras in your studio and all this sort of stuff, you've already achieved the technical expertise to go and connect a couple MIDI cables together or a USB cable from your device to your digital piano, and suddenly you're in a new universe, which is a really wonderful place to be. And your students will not have difficulty with this, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, the opportunity is the flip side of adversity was actually what was coming to my mind. I'm glad you repeated that. I mean, and I'll just say for me, and George didn't ask me to say this, I literally plugged a cable, a USB cable from the digital piano into the laptop, and it just worked. First try, not with George coaching me through that process. So this really is easy, and it's easy to dip your toes in the water. And so, yeah, again, just as a note to all the teachers watching this, please reach out to us. Let us know what we can do to help. George, we are so thankful for you and your time today. So thank you for joining us.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you so much for having us. And if anybody wants to contact me through the Time Warp website, please feel free. Be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, and tell us, just so we can hear it, your website, George.
Well, why don't I even type it into the chat here? It's Time Warp Tech, TECH.com.
Excellent. And we'll have a link on the recording. There we go. Got it, George. We'll have a link on the recording to George's website. I encourage you to check these things out. So this has been Key Concepts, Conversations for Piano Teachers. We've been taking a look with George Litterst at Time Warp Tech and some software solutions to take your lessons to the next level. And so just as a reminder, our next session coming up is on October 1st. We'll be taking a look at some actual audio tools to improve some of the sound features, you know, on an acoustic level as well. But this has been a lot of fun. So with that, I think we're going to close it down here. Thanks again, George, and thank you everybody that has attended and watched. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.